The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to South Derbyshire again, everybody. Now we're beginning this episode where we left off yesterday. Behind me there you can see a church in a place called Long Lane, and that's one of two churches you'll find in this particular parish. There's one here and one in the actual main village. This is the parish of Trusley. Trusley, brushwood clearing. Next up in South Derbyshire, we've got Trusley. Again, it's a pretty small one when compared to the likes of some of the towns we often visit, but this is a village that has much more than you might think. Many of the buildings in Trusley village date from the 18th century, including All Saints Church, which was built for William Cook in 1712. Cook is an important name out here. The original home of the family has long since vanished. However, in 1904, Major General John Talbot Cook built a new one, Trusley Manor. That still stands today in a prominent position just south of the church. In 1948, at the end of World War II, Trusley Manor was greatly reduced in size. Let's go back to the beginning to get more of an idea of the place we're dealing with. In the Domesday Book, Trusley was listed as Toxinai, and the manor belonged to Henry de Ferrers. Later it was owned by Ralph de Buffy, who sold it to Oliver de Odingsels at some point after 1216. In 1418, a de Odingsels co-heiress married Thomas Cook, and from that point onwards, the family have been associated with Trusley. Notable Cook family members include a few politicians. So in essence, we're in an estate village here, but this has got to rank among the smallest ones we have ever seen. Don't assume Trusley is an insignificant speck on the modern map, it's far from it, and I'm going to prove it. Let's have a little wander and see exactly what's here. I'm looking forward to this one. We start where we left off yesterday. This is Long Lane again, except this time we're on the Trusley side of the boundary. This is Christ Church, a Grade 2 listed building which dates from 1859. It was built by William Evans of Elliston and designed by Robert Evans. That's the same Robert Evans of the Nottingham firm Heyne & Evans. We know all about his more famous business partner already. The east window is by William Wales of Newcastle. The vestry and the tower were added in 1874, and the latter has a clock and 3 bells. Inside, the pulpit is carved out of a solid block of Derbyshire marble and adorned with bosses of Blue John. We'll learn more about that when we hit Castleton in High Peak. Now, of course, this isn't the only church in Trusley Parish. There's a second one, but that's in the main village. Now, before we can go to Trusley village and check out what that's like, there's another landmark which is not actually in the village itself that we need to cover, and we need to drive along Long Lane here towards Derby, because there's an area called Grangefields, and this has got a very, very interesting history. Between Long Lane and Trusley is Grangefields, which these days is a wedding venue. This has a long history that dates back to before the time of Domesday. Lying as it does only a quarter of a mile south of Long Lane, it's not inconceivable to think that the Romans might have had something to do with this. After all, Long Lane itself is a Roman road. A Roman villa has never been identified anywhere in Derbyshire, but if one ever was, a gentle south-facing, well-drained slope is the most likely place for it to have been. Long Lane is a promising candidate, and some believe Grangefields was on or near the site of one that has yet to be identified formally. Grangefields seems to have had an alternative name originally, the rather lyrical-sounding Thurmundarsley. That was first recorded in a pair of early charters. It derives from the Old Norse personal name Thormund. Grangefields was once part of lands owned by the Cistercian monks of Croxton Abbey. It was part of a 40-acre gift made by Robert de Beaufy in 1180 and later topped up with further land. Here, the monks established or took over a farm. That's how the name Grangefields came into being. Sometimes monks were sent to work on farms which were called granges. In time, therefore, the place became known not as the Mundersley, but Grangefields instead. Grangefields has been owned by many different families, including the Glossops of Wirksworth, the Fitches and the Curzons, the latter of whom we spoke at length about in Kedleston. Grangefields would eventually come to Robert Newton in the 18th century, who was an immensely rich old bachelor. As such, he was owner of a number of houses, including Mickleover Manor, Norton House and Bearwoodcote Hall. Keep the latter in mind for Friday. His aim in acquiring Grangefields was undoubtedly to extend his Mickleover estate, because he was a keen agricultural improver, and clustering landholdings held certain advantages of scale and potential efficiencies. By the 1820s, the Stretton family were farming here, and it's they who replaced the venerable old house between 1853 and 1862. The original stone foundations of the 12th century granary are still visible in places though, as is some of the ancient stone paving, reused in places in the courtyard. In 1950, Grangefields was sold to the Cook Steele family of the adjacent Trusley estate, from which it had been separated some 660 years before. Okay, now we're in Trusley Village, and one thing I've learned already about this place is it doesn't do parking spaces. I've basically had to pull onto a grass verge and just, hopefully, in the sort of half an hour I'll be here, because I won't be here for very long, there'll be no tractors or anything that try to squeeze their way past the car. There should be enough room anyway. I've employed my rural parking technique, basically pull on the verge and leave enough space for a tractor. That's kind of a general rule of thumb when you're out in the sticks, I suppose. So behind me you can see a pair of gates. We'll be talking about those in a bit, but we're going to be walking through Trusley Village first, so we're heading north to see what civilization is like out here. Now, the definition of Trusley varies. Everything we've seen so far has been within Trusley parish, of course, but how do the locals see the actual village? The core area of Trusley is smaller than most hamlets. It has just 11 houses. In 2023, Trusley had 23 residents, 19 adults and 4 children. That's not including the 5 farms around the central core though, but they won't add much to those figures. Most of those 23 people live close to the church. I guess if this was America, we'd be calling the central core downtown Trusley. Apart from the church, the village has Trusley Manor, an old hall, an old rectory, 1 farm, an Airbnb and 5 cottages. Thriving metropolis or what? So, as such, Trusley is a very quiet place. Nothing much was happening here at the time of the Domesday Book, and nothing much is happening now. The limit of its public facilities stretch as far as a postbox in the wall at Home Farm. One of the great things about England is that there are still so many little places that give the appearance of being forgotten by time. Trusley is one of those places, but it's not behind the times. It's only 15 minutes from here to both Derby and Burton-on-Trent. The church is next. This is dedicated to All Saints and was built between 1712 and 13 in the Queen Anne style. It's a small brick church with a low west tower and a scrolled stone pediment over its west door. The Cook family are commemorated in many of the church's memorials. The nave roof has Cook shields on the central bosses of its tie beams, and the chancel has various reset slab stones to many members of their family. Other notable features of this church include the pre-Union royal arms of Queen Anne, a late 15th century bell and a maiden's garland. It also has a triple-decker pulpit, original raised and fielded panel oak box pews, and original turned and carved baluster altar rails. All Saints is, without question, one of Derbyshire's little gems. It sits at the heart of one of the first 4 conservation areas to be designated in Derbyshire in 1969, a recognition of the importance of its character as an unspoilt example of a Derbyshire village. It hasn't altered much since. Okay, so once beyond the church, you've then got 2 buildings which are rather important to Trusley. One of them is behind the camera, and the other one is currently out of sight, but we'll definitely be talking about it in a moment. The Cook family had some prominent figures in the times of the Stuarts. Sir John Cook, for example, was Deputy Treasurer of the Navy between 1599 and 1604, and during the 1620s he became a Master of Requests at court under Charles I. He was, in 1625, one of the King's 2 principal Secretaries of State. Another notable example is George Cook, Bishop of Bristol in 1633 and Bishop of Hereford in 1636. The Trusley estate has remained with the Cook family almost continuously since 1418, the only break being between the death of William Cook in 1718 and its return 100 years later following the marriage of John Cook to Susanna Wilmot. During World War II, Trusley Manor was occupied by the Land Army, and in the late 1940s a large portion of the building was demolished. At the end of the war, the male line of the Cook family's Trusley branch died out as the last 2 remaining male heirs were killed in action. Instead, therefore, it was left to their sister, Frances, to carry the line instead. After marrying Ronald Steele, the family took the Cook-Steele name instead, and today the estate is still owned by them. They still live here too. The standout property in the village is Trusley Manor. Its history goes back to the 14th century at least, but the house that stands today was rebuilt in the mid-18th, refurbished between 1945 and 47, and again in 1985. It's listed Grade 2. The Cook family made this their home, and the first of them to live here was Sir Francis. The house continued in the family until the death of William Cook in 1718. It was partially demolished in 1728, having lain empty for nearly a decade, and a vernacular farmhouse was built on the foundations. This incorporated an old chimney breast, the lower courses of bricks, and some of its floors. Dereliction in the 18th century caused one visitor to describe the site as bearing an aspect of most melancholy neglect. Between 1902 and 1904, a new hall was erected on a different site some 100 metres to the south, but in the mid-20th century the farmhouse which had succeeded the old hall was successfully turned back into a seat. Its former coach house now acts as a village hall. And there we go, we are back to the beginning. So a nice little amble around Trusley. That didn't take me very long. I didn't expect it to, quite frankly. Tell you what, that footpath was an interesting walk because you kind of lose the way marker halfway across that little field. But luckily, that's what maps are for, and I knew where to go. Time to move on to the next one, which is equally as small as this. And that's really that. Trusley is a small, quiet little village in the middle of the countryside, but it's definitely not the sort of place you want to be overlooking. I loved it here. The next one is very similar to this. Let's head there now and see what it's like. See you tomorrow. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.